All right, hello YouTube, joined by Mark Fraser and Eric. We're going to discuss infectious disease and what we can come up with for a solution within the next hour. So for the first 15 minutes, we are going to discuss what we feel is currently happening, what we think and feel is currently happening, that's both good and bad in the infectious disease space. So if anyone would like to start, I actually wrote notes out because this is the one that I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about, unlike every other issue.
I mean, I'll just contribute one small notion at the start. Just the idea that there are two separate things here, right? There's a health of people is the one thing, and then there's the strain on systems is the other part of it, right? And obviously these two things are linked, but in many ways they're in conflict with each other, right? I mean, a good example currently would be somewhere like Italy, who has basically, I understand, shut down the entire country. I mean, the message is everybody stay home, pretty much. Basically, I understand is the message in Italy. So, and one way of looking at that might be to say that, you know, all right, we know the economy is going to get slammed here, but paramount to our concerns are the well-being of the citizens and not overwhelming the healthcare system, right? Whereas in America, it's been pretty much the opposite, you know, go about business as usual, playing it down, it's no big deal, that kind of thing. So I think that, and I would read that as their primary concern is not collapsing the stock market, you know what I mean, not creating, you know, not creating too much damage to the economy in the short term. So yeah, that's my early view on it.
All right. Well, I've gotten fairly headlong into a number of groups that are exploring steps that people can take individually and as households and with their neighbors, and then looking into also opportunities for innovation in the way we're approaching this in a more systematic form. And so I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but I think some broad themes for me are the way we're dealing it now has been very dependent on sort of gatekeepers and arbiters who, in the case of the US and in the state of Washington, CDC prevented, because of FDA rules, prevented states from innovating to come up with their test kits when the bottleneck started to be clear that CDC had dropped the ball. There was essentially an edict saying, we will not allow efforts by state governments and by private providers to come up with solutions. And that contrasted horribly with what South Korea did, which was almost from day one say, look, we recognize we're going to need all hands on deck. So part of their success in getting detection of the problem was that they did encourage a lot of different players to innovate. And they responded in days where we were essentially flat-footed for many weeks. And in the case of state of Washington, it was the state's decision to defy this rule. And they went ahead with their own test kits. And because of that, this disease, which already had galloped far more than it should have, did finally get resolved through this initiative at state level. So my hope is, as we segue later into solutions, if we can see ways to encourage innovations and breakthroughs in a full spectrum of fields by opening the system up to innovation, but also introducing accountability and incentives, which are sorely lacking in the failures that we've seen from the central approach. So that's my view, and I'm sure it's a controversial one.
I think for me, my notes here are more concentrating on just infectious disease in general, that right now in society, we live a very global society. People jet set around the world all the time. No one quarantines. We don't have any, we have screening going onto airplanes for terrorist reasons. We have nothing coming off of airplanes, including places once they've known that the coronavirus was there. Even in, I'm about to go to the airport tomorrow, and I'm sure they have no screening coming off. There've been people who've come back from Italy and China into Canada, the United States, who they basically, if they do anything, give them a pamphlet like, here's how you self-quarantine. And that is ridiculous with what level we're at right now. Our doctors aren't really taught how to think outside the box. They're not taught how to innovate. So when something comes up like this, they're expecting a memo. And so they don't even know how to deal with this. And so there's been many, many stories of doctors who have somebody come in with a fever, with the symptoms, who are like, well, we can't test you, but also like they don't have the resources to give the person, they're not gloved up, they don't have masks on, they don't put into place anything that would stop the spread of infectious disease. And then of course there's the misinformation in media that because they've been crying wolf so much, everything is the end of the world, everything is an apocalypse, that now that there might actually be a wolf, no one listened to it in time. And those that did, there's like simultaneously this overreaction and underreaction. And we don't trust I don't trust our institutions. And I think many of us don't trust our institutions. And those that do are now seeing that there's a lot of cracks in the system, that our governments don't know how to respond to things like this because they have to deal with it. This is both an illness and an economic thing. And how do they piss off one side to do another? What if they shut things down too early and hurt their economy? What if they do? And it's all of these top-down approaches that we're also seeing that it's more effective in more totalitarian governments and governments or cultures that have more of a group mentality, that it's not all about you, it's about your culture and your family and stuff as well. And so they're more likely to do the things that are volunteer driven, do the things like self-quarantining and not going out. And also coming out are a lot of potential solutions like vitamin C and vitamin D and not having 5G or whatever the solutions are. We've got no way to know which ones are accurate, which ones could have a grain of truth, but maybe they're not the place we spend our resources now, especially when medicine's not being available because it's being made in China. If vitamin C is available and the profit motive to have regular over-the-counter medication and vitamins be the solution is absolutely the wrong message. Oh, sorry, it's the message that they don't want you to get, right? Like, heaven forbid you actually cure this with vitamin C. Maybe we could do that with other things as well. But the funding isn't there to actually, in more healthy times, look at what can keep us healthiest. How do we get everyone an adequate diet and all of those things. So those are a bit of my notes.
I think the economic thing takes many forms. One of the ways in which companies have driven towards greater economic efficiency is this very, very short response time supply chain kind of thing, right? Where everyone's living on knowing that there's another delivery coming tomorrow, right? There's no redundancy, there's no reserves at lots of stages in the supply chain. There's absolutely no redundancy, and so it doesn't take very much. It's brittle and fragile in all sorts of ways. It doesn't take very much for it to crack.
Right, and I think this points to an area of potential innovation and hope. Again, if the system is flexible enough to allow for experiments, one of the things that might be done by virtual cohorts, for example, is to say, okay, we are going to test the following. It can be the front loading of selenium and zinc and vitamin C and so forth, vitamin D, in the following ways. And there, these self-organizing swarms could research, and they could create their own clusters and groups of people that had different ideas in terms of good ways to manage risks and good protocols. And it would not be, I think, that hard if we had biosensors. Arduino, has $8, $10 devices on Amazon that can measure temperature changes in a person. Link them up with Bluetooth and have these kind of tracking systems. So if cohorts were to do that virtually, and there were to be ways to track in data vaults, basically, and anonymize and so forth, that would be a way for the system to learn without going through these absurd multi-year hurdles of validating what is going to be allowed to be offered as a treatment. So I think this kind of approach, also with actual communities, there are tens of millions of households in Asia, in Europe, in North America, who are members of condo associations, homeowner associations, housing cooperatives, all of which have very well set up, often, systems for deciding on what good practices people should have in everyone's interest to make it a safe place and thriving place to be. So if these organizations were to have the flexibility to partner with virtual healthcare providers, for example, K-Health is an Israeli company that's doing telemedicine with live chats with physicians for $20. If it were possible for these groups to do what mutual associations did before the New Deal, and have the ability to have bids from different telemedicine providers who can offer prescriptions, and then for these associations to set up systems for delivery of prescribed medicines to actually the individual doors of people who are now sick. This would ease a lot of the strain on the ICUs and others, which now have very little, and the frontline doctors, where people are coming in and spreading and adding to the viral loads on the frontline providers who are totally ill-equipped. So I think there's a huge potential if these kind of partnerships, where the profit motive of the insurance companies is to keep people, from getting sick, or life insurance companies, if there were enough flexibility for these contractual associations and virtual cohorts to start making their best guesses of what is a response, and then sharing the data on what works, I think that would be a win, an omni-win all around.
We like omni-wins.
We do, and I think that was a natural segue into the utopian part, or the omni-win society, when we live in a world that, ours don't need to match. We don't need to agree on what that actually looks like, but giving your vision of what a future that worked for you and you thought would have worked for society would look like in however long you need that to be, 5, 10, 100 years in the future. So I have, again, some notes here.
Yeah, this isn't really a vision, but it's just like more of a way to think about it. So it's using the coronavirus as a specific example. In terms of threat to health, from what I understand, in healthy populations that have access to healthcare, blah, 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 the death rate is like less than 0.5%. What tallies it up is the old people and the poor responses and so on. So it seems to me that it would be nice if we could all just relax. There's a disease going around. Some of you are going to get sick. You're going to spend a few days in bed. You're going to have a bit of a sniffle. Most of you are going to be absolutely fine, right? And it's going to spread like wildfire this time because there's no immunity in the population. But in the future, there will be widespread immunity, and that will contain, future incarnations of it. So the fact that we cannot do that, right? That we can't just for various reasons, right? No one's manning the tills, no one's manning the emergency departments, no one's driving the trucks to deliver the food to the, you know what I mean? So as I said, it's not a vision, but it seems like a way to think about it would be to just let, or for there to be enough slack, enough redundancy out there that at any given moment, 10% of people can go down with a flu and be out for a week, and we can absorb that, right? That's, you can't do that while everyone's trying to eke every last penny out of every last transaction, every last hour out of every employee, and so on and so on. You know, there is no slack in a system that's been doing that for decades.
Yeah, there's a big, I mean, we had this conversation on Wednesday in our mega group of that with that mentality, that's where a lot of people are. A lot of people are like, well, if I get sick, oh, well, I'm healthy, I'm fed, I have access to healthcare. Should something go horrifically wrong? But there are demographics that are much more affected. And they, quite frankly, are the people we need to be solving these problems. They're people with a lot of years of experience, right? The elderly, and we need every generation creating AB. And so having a system where we look after people who are chronically ill and old, not because it makes us feel fuzzy, but because they're human beings and they're truly worth helping, because what they offer to society is a diversity of thought, a diversity of experience. Having been through chronic illness, this pandemic affects me both more and less. I know how to handle stress more than a lot of people. And yet I'm not more drastically impacted. I don't have an immune system problem and I don't have lung issues. So me and my kid would probably make it through. But creating a world in the future that we can take time when we're sick, right? That no one has to work anywhere. In my vision of the future, you're only choosing to do the work you want to do. So when you're sick, like I've been sick all year, I've had a cold. And I've gone on all of my calls because it's what I'm here to do. I enjoy them. There was one day I think I had to cancel it. I was like, oh, I really don't want to. Like it was, and I'm not getting paid for it, right? It's not because of financial burden that I'm showing up. It's because I love doing this. And the more we're in that world, the less people are going to be going to work sick, the more we can take care of people who are sick. And the more we're able to, if we want to, live in communities that are, I want to say isolated, and that's the wrong word, but if I'm part of a community right now, and there's 4 or 5 nurses, all who work different places. Some of the kids go to the one local public school, some go to private schools around the city. Everyone, has different places of worship. That's how we spread it. You know what I mean? Like nurses on the front line, they're bringing it back. So being able to have, in cases like this, a community where your doctors and nurses are within that community, and your kids all go to the same school that is an amazing school that deals with them as individuals, and everyone has access to adequate nutrition so that they're at their healthiest peak without dictating what that actually is, right? I don't get to take your burgers, fries away from you, but I can offer you better food and nutrition. In a world that we can trust whatever system we've created, we feel more comfortable to share our data and do things like Mark was talking about. I don't want Google having my data. I don't trust our governments to have my data. But if we had an open sourced, owned by all of us, democratic, transparent company that I could say, I can envision a world where we have our version of Google Maps, and I know that when I get sick, I could put in my symptoms because I'm not leaving my house. I'm not going to go get tested, but I could say, hey, I might or might not have this thing. It can warn people, it can give you a green to red. How likely is it you have it? How should you be self-quarantining, and meet people where they're at while they're self-quarantining? If you're not able to, why aren't you? Can we bring you your stuff? Can we, are you bored? Can we have a video chat with you? Like, what is it that isn't being met by you being isolated? And can we meet those needs for you? And truly interconnecting and not leaving it up to our governments to do, and figuring out new information sources that aren't the current media. That next time there's a pandemic and a doctor sounds the alarm, we figure it out, right? You know what I mean? Like, what happened? How can we look at this with hindsight and not recreate it in the future? What needs to be in place?
Well, riffing off that, there are a lot of giant companies that are offering smart city packages in very costly ways, In Europe, there's a project in Italy called snap4city.org, the number 4. And this is a smart city system, completely open source, that allows localities to track all kinds of indicators that information people put in the system. So for health, for safety, for environmental monitoring, these are the vital signs. And I think one of the adjacent possibles potentially is to see if we can have a groundswell to make a version of Snap4City accessible to neighborhoods and to the condo associations and any kind of housing co-ops that are already organized, that would allow them to have their sense of what's going on, and a system also for people to help one another, as you were saying, the video chats, the ability to even have humidity levels monitored in apartment levels if people want to opt in, and have the ability with smart humidifiers, which are on the market for about $50 or so, for neighbors of the choosing, or friends and family, the choosing of each household or each resident, to be able to have virtual connections, and also to some degree make sure that the basic problems weren't getting out of hand, and if they are, be able to summon in on-call physicians like Doctors Online or K-Health, to be able to take the measure. There are biosensors that cost around $10 that measure oxygen levels. Again, these are Arduino based devices. And so if these civil society networks are able to extend the range of sensors on a voluntary basis and have the support networks, layered networks, I think that would be an enormous reassurance for a lot of people, and potentially could save a lot of lives and a lot of potential train wrecks for ICUs that are now seeing people come in without these measures having been taken before. So that would, I think, be a good path potentially for the adjacent possible.
I like the idea of sharing our data. I don't like the idea of it being in the hands of any single government or a tech firm, which is the only thing we kind of have as the potential right now. And the idea of Google somehow having my heart rate and temperature means I'm not going to opt in. But if we can find a way to have those conversations to say what makes you safe, right? What makes this different than China? What makes this different than the social currency, right? That it's voluntary, that you're doing good for yourself and humanity, and there is benefit to you. I want this data system, not just for infectious disease, of course, but it's huge for infectious disease, because any infectious disease, there's a cost to having it, right? I've actually just told my community, I was like, I haven't been there this week. I need someone to mop the floor. I'm, self-containing, and they're not having meals, and we don't live there. And someone sent me an email like, do you have the virus? Do you think you have the virus? I was like, no, that's not. But I'm someone who would absolutely, I'd post it on Facebook. I'd have no problem doing that. Yeah. So that everyone who had been in contact with me could know. But a lot of people don't, right? If your kid has lice, are you going to tell people? If you had a sexually transmitted disease, are you going to tell people? Yeah. If there's a way to easily let people know that, so they know their risk level and they can get tested, that is a benefit to everyone. But again, Google's going to know my health, measurements. I'm not okay with that. I want it to be my good and the good of humanity.
I know the ship has now sailed, but in the earlier stages, if one is serious about containment, then especially, again, in the early stages, we didn't know this, but with an incubation period of 14 days and whatever it is, 30, 40 people 30–40% of people who get it are asymptomatic, right? And so, you know, the only way is to simply test everyone. As soon as there is an outbreak, you create a quarantine zone and you test everybody in that quarantine zone. You know, it doesn't matter whether they got symptoms or not. It doesn't matter who they've been in contact with. You know, blanket. If you're serious about it, I'm not saying that's not without its problems also, but it seems to me that's the only way.
No, I think it's a great point. A great point. And I guess the part of the question is: do we wait for canonical testing, which has the advantage of having apples to apples comparisons, but it comes at a cost if it's bungled, of leaving, you know, millions, tens of millions of people at risk when they need not be, versus having a system. In the case of France, if you're putting up a building in Paris, you don't get the municipal inspector to give you a certificate saying it's safe. What France does is say, if you have an insurer who's not a fly-by-night, an established, respected insurer, certifying that this building is safe, that's a green light. And I think if we had a way for the insurance companies, particularly life insurance companies, to have skin in the game, in the sense if they put their brand name behind a testing, a way of testing, I think their incentives are all lined up to get that out early and make sure it's effective. And there could be enough learning in the sense of which of these tests that was rolled out quickly worked best, and some accountability by deep pocket people if their tests screw up. That to me is a healthier or more resilient path than just praying that this bureaucracy is going to get its system up and at a world-class level. And we've seen, you know, what near catastrophe has ensued by having this blind trust that incumbent institutions can do this efficiently and effectively and accountably. I don't think there's any accountability within the public health system. In a sense, it's like the Pentagon. You know, it's very keen to assure people it's got the answers, and then trillions of dollars later, you know, oh, I guess it didn't work, and no accountability for that. So I would love to see a system that experiments and innovates system-wide with new types of transparency and accountability for those who are purporting to be acting in the public interest.
Yeah, I mean, transparency is a theme which we come back to again and again and again in our conversations, one way or another. Yeah, absolutely. The trust is built on transparency, right? On being able to look at what people said and look at what people did, and yeah, without obfuscation.
Yeah, I think there also, though, like there's, I don't know why I'm going to say this, but like too much risk we put on corporations and governments as well. That's part of the reason the shit hits the fan is because they know they can get sued. They know these things are going to happen. So I'm not going to put a test out there. What if I get sued for putting this test out there? Right? So being able to have a system that is like, listen, we're in the infancy of this disease. If you can come up with a test, and you know, we're going to we want to test all of them to see how positive they are, but there's no fallback on you as long as you are transparent and open about what is how accurate, right? You're not fudging the data, you're not doing those things. But having a system, like right now, when I did my video this morning on all of the different sectors of society and how we're kind of seeing them break apart. And one huge one is business. There are tons and tons of businesses that are going under, including the big ones, but now they've been bailed out by $1.5 trillion. So it's going to be the small ones that go under. And I think a part of that is that the people who start businesses are those that are higher risk, that have a higher risk tolerance. Someone like me with a very low risk tolerance is never going to start a business where I'm going to take on all that risk. But if I did, I would know a contingency for every scenario. And our issue is business being incentivized to make profit and then cover up their mistakes is like not a great culture for having us innovate in a way that is going to bring the best ideas to market. And so I think we're exactly at the half an hour mark. So we can talk about the adjacent possible, which for me is what you touched on, Mark. How do we get solutions into the world without them needing to go through the marketplace? Without them needing to, if you have an idea, whether it's just the sparkle of an idea that because this is brand new. If you were thinking about COVID-19 4 months ago and thinking why were you thinking about these things, right? So if it's a new idea, how do we help you progress it? How do we test it? How do we make sure it's the lowest risk possible, but still going forward? Because that's also what our governments have to deal with is action and inaction, right? If for inaction, they don't get as much trouble as taking the wrong action, including them completely fucking up over the last few weeks and not doing stuff soon enough, not doing it. So now it's more spread. They're not going to get as much trouble of that if they had shut down and then it hadn't been a big deal. So being able to say, is this safe enough that it's better than what we are currently doing, which is nothing? And then giving permission to try the thing, right? I like your idea of hey, we're going to take zinc and vitamin C because that's what we want to take. We feel like that's going to be our best option. But feeding that feeding that information back into the system so we can have more information on how this thing spreads, have more information on what your best defense is to not get it. And if you get it, to live through it at all demographics.
Yeah, I think it's at both ends. It's what we're maybe at the threshold of seeing with Game B is the emergence not only of these self-organizing networks in terms of the purchasing side, but also in terms of the supplying side. So right now, the field, there are lots of barriers that keep people from offering services without jumping through outlandish hoops. For education is one example. I mean, the cartels that have got credentialing systems solely to protect, their market advantage. They essentially make it next to impossible for non-credentialed alternatives to come up. But what if there were to be places, and I'm not that optimistic that the U.S. is going to be anywhere near the front of the packet with this, but what if some societies that have seen the extent of breakdown and failure in the established top-down systems allow associations of providers to create their own insurance offerings? Mutual insurance companies do have a history, and it would be possible, I think, for groups to form that say, we think we understand this particular set of risks and rewards, and we can offer then group policies. Let's say the Game B and Mutual Insurance Company, one of several, hopefully, hit upon certain kinds of good practices that would lower risks, health risks, dramatically. And then it could crowdfund or come up with other ways to source enough money to say, we're willing to take these bets if you will document in a verifiable way, uploading that you're now doing these exercises every week, or sharing some of the grocery bill receipts. Then those groups that opt in these ways could get a much better deal from these alternatives, the classic corporate offerings. So I think it works both on the supply side, that mutual associations can in a freer market, they can come in and offer, as well as on the consumer side, to let people buy things as a group. Right now, for example, if I'm in a neighborhood that has no condominium association, as I understand, it's illegal for me and my neighbors to pool together and say, we are going to shop as a group, a self-organized group, to get the best deal for life insurance or the best deal for liability insurance, homeowner insurance, you name it. That's illegal. And it's because corporations don't want to lose the kind of market advantage they now have. So I would put that high on the list of reform experiments within the US and outside the US to see what happens when you remove the barriers in that way.
Interesting to see it play out. I don't have a lot of faith in insurance. I think when it first started, it was about mitigating our risk, and it started with a purpose, and now it's only in it for profit. So unless you have truly a member-owned insurance, which isn't about one person having the mission, and then like they're figuring out the math, and they're figuring out the math to make a profit. So they're looking not to pay you, right? They're looking not to pay for your medication and your life insurance and everything else. Whereas in Canada, where we have universal healthcare, I don't have to worry about that. It's overarching. So it's like, well, do we want people to stay alive? We can't afford $1 million per year for somebody's medication. And we don't fund things that are brand new, unfortunately. But anyway, I don't want to stay on that, because I think that there is potential there, and potential to play different games and find what does work within that. I just don't know if you could start a insurance company with 10,000 people and $100,000, but you could do a neighborhood association. Right. You could do, hey, how do you, in fact, there is an app that I downloaded. I'm getting email alerts for my local neighborhood, and it's hard to find. It's like a Facebook for your neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And so I get the odd, like, hey, we lost this shoe on our walk, or we have a dog that's not here, to be able to have people sign up during this crisis, so that not only are they there right now, but they're there after, right? That like now we have these connected neighborhoods. Now that I don't have my one that I drive to, how do I connect with my actual local neighbors? Including in a time when we're actually less capable of actually being there for one another. In a, like, I can't offer childcare for somebody else who has to go to work because we're self-isolating. You know, like if our school closed down due to a strike, I could absolutely offer childcare to somebody else. But having those systems in place, having the ability to coordinate with neighbors. And I envision something about like the Dragon's Den, or Shark Tank is I think what it's called in the States, where instead of having billionaires who are seeing, will they invest in this and is this financially viable, having scientists and engineers stating how good is this thing, this solution, and how viable is it? Is it better than the nothing? What else is out there, right? It's comparing it to what they know is out there. And I think that could be something that could be started with 10,000 viewers. And, you know, anyone who has a solution could come on and be like, hey, yes, look at my solution. Is it the best? Maybe not, but like it's something, right? It's a way to test the coronavirus. It's a way to help people self-isolate. It's like whatever the solution is, right? I'm not thinking of this just for the infectious disease, but it's something that could benefit when you have tens of millions of people watching it, which you start with 10,000 and grow, then you can do things like realize how ridiculous it is that we need 2 years of testing on something that's going to save lives now, right? That's like, especially when, quite frankly, they're not doing that testing on actual things in the marketplace that bypass that all the time when it's for heart disease and all these other things because they have lobbyists. But now that it's like people's lives on the line, now we're going to make sure we go through 2 years of rigorous testing. That seems a little ridiculous. Can we get the best of? Can we get the least risk possible? And do people understand this is risky? And are you willing to take it?
The question I have with this notion of kind of an open, you know, here's this idea, here's that idea, that unless there's a way for there to be a group that has a sample size, it's very hard to know if it's, let's say there's a subgroup that's really sold on melatonin as a way to minimize risk. Another subgroup that's off on a combination of things, that unless you've got large enough samples and reliable data that's privacy protected, encrypted, but also verifiable. That the system as a whole can't learn. So I'd favor, as an adjacent possible, something that allowed cohorts to form around whatever it is, and that we hopefully don't have little episodic, tiny, things clogging up the public square in that kind of environment, but rather have competition among systemic approaches that have opt-in and buy-in by large enough groups, either virtual cohorts or actual places that opt in to whatever their choice is of a systemic approach. I think that we'll learn faster what combinations of things have most results, if that's possible.
I absolutely agree. What I was picturing for the Shark's Tank Dragon's Den thing was more like, oh, we don't have enough respirators. Hey, I've invented a new respirator. Is this better? Yes, it's not better than the ones that are on the market, but is it better than nothing? Right? Like more a invention or a system for people to look at and critique. Because yeah, you're not going to know. Vitamin C is the answer. Well, unless we test it, we really don't know. So who is willing to take vitamin C? I'm healthy enough. I'll take it. Compare me to other people. I'll give you my data. Right? So yeah, and that would be one of the things you could put in front of Dragon's Den, right? Be like, hey, we want to be able to form these groups and be able to report. How do we make it safe enough? How do we make it this way? But having a process to be able to solve solutions, this is mine, doing solution raising, and then how do we create the technology to do this on a grand scale? But right now, when we're needing ideas, how do we get the best ideas out there without having them have to go through the marketplace where they have to find their own funding, they have to find their own marketing, they have to, build their own trust, instead of like, is the respirator good? I want my dad to stay alive. You know what I mean? Like, so I want that respirator if the other option is, sorry, everybody over 60 gets to die now, right? Like having, and just giving each other permission, maybe with a Jubilee, which would not be done at 10,000, but like, hey, we're going to try these things and illegal or not, come after all of us then, right? Like we're going to try these things.
Eric, have you found online any groups that are well springs of innovation that you think would be an adjacent possible to?
Well, two things occurred to me while I've been listening to you guys talk. The first is the idea of cohorts trying out zinc or vitamin C or whatever it might be. In principle, I absolutely agree with it. The problem is that unless these things are very carefully controlled, that within that cohort, okay, everybody's taking zinc, but you don't know what else they're doing that may be, co-impacting or nullifying or whatever. So the very, very, very careful control and analysis needs to be done. Well, the other thing that occurred to me, and this isn't really adjacent possible, this is a little bit further down the road, I guess, but what you were talking, I think it was you, Mark, talking earlier on about this, anonymized information gathering thing. If everybody, I'm just imagining everybody hooked up to that and it's recording everything that you do, right? Every glass of water that you drink, every run that you take, every shit that you have, and what time and how solid it is and all of this kind of thing, right? Then the combination of choices, dietary, lifestyle, whatever, sleeping habits, etc., that best immunize you from a particular disease or whatever, again, whatever it might be. These things would emerge from the data, right? Or at least correlatory relationships would emerge from the data. They wouldn't necessarily be causal relationships, right? That would have to be examined. But correlatory relationships would pop up all the time, and that would be excellent fodder for examination. So yeah, Jubilee's objection, which I absolutely share, notwithstanding that you don't want Google having all your data so they can sell you more shit. But if that data could be used in such a way as to compare habits and choices with outcomes on a grand scale, right? And use that data not to sell you more shit, not to frighten you more, but not to manipulate your choices, but just to help you and inform you.
Yep. Well, I think it's within reach. There's a vibrant Facebook group that's less than 48 hours old or around that called Open Hardware, COVID 2019 Open Hardware, some keywords like that. But it's just a geyser of ideas from people in healthcare, techies, engineers, folks like me who don't have a background, but essentially it's just effervescent with ideas for these possible things that could be done. One of which was a toilet seat that wouldn't flush. The toilet wouldn't flush unless the top were down. And it's evident that the plumes that come, which are laden with virus in infected households, these plumes are 12-fold greater if people flush the toilet with the seat up. So to your point, I think it would be possible potentially in this community of innovation that's and people are very motivated to find things that work, that if they were to opt in to a system that was essentially a data vault, not captured by a corporation or government, but a peer-to-peer system where that could track through smart sensors these kind of habits and behaviors. It might be that among the zinc popping cohort, there might, if there were tens of thousands of them, some of which were using innovations like the humidity sensors and the way for neighbors and friends to make sure that those were staying in a good range. And another cohort that was into the toilet seat scenario, it would be possible with large enough groups to have correlations emerge, not just from one or two, but from potentially myriad combinations of these types of practices. And the prize, what would be the benefit for people coming in? I think the way it could be structured would be to say, all who participate in this are going to have access within X number of weeks to correlations that look interesting and links. If you want to order the $10 oximeter sensor on eBay, which you can, here's the links to do that, or the Wi-Fi humidifier, the smart humidifier, whatever the combination of things are. And I know that's a challenge, but I think there's such a focus now on the part of people worldwide, in such big stakes, that it potentially could be something that would catch on with a few pilot projects that could scale.
Yeah, I have a little bit of an issue of linking the information to the products that are gonna, because that seems like very, very, very closely akin to advertising, right? To highly targeted advertising. That it is almost that, right?
It depends on the incentive, right?
Yeah,
it's us being like, hey, we want the data.
Agreed.
This is the best place you can get the data, versus the person who's making that being like, this is the best one to get the data.
I'm okay with that, taking zinc and living with a dehumidifier lowers your risk of blah, blah, blah. But then it's on you to go and find where, your zinc and your humidifier somewhere or other. That's what I would say.
In each cohort, each trust network could be the way. I think part of the problem is this is such a complex field for people who aren't up to speed in it, that they can get lost. So the more that their trust networks can help shortlist options, not say this is the place or that's the place, but to at least get 2 or 3 options if you are concerned about humidity levels or whatever, you don't get lost in a time where time is precious with being a zero starting point to do the searches. At least I would opt into a cohort.
I understand what you're saying. It's a difficult one because it is, it's a hop, skip, and not even a hop, skip, and a jump away from targeted advertising. But I also understand exactly the point you're making. Fair enough.
There's another piece of data that I would love to incorporate in, it's not people's DNA, people's genome sequencing has gotten cheap enough that if you've done it and you can put it into the system, and especially who we want the genomes of, sadly, are the people who've died, right? The people who this has been a death sentence for them. Because what do they have in common? And what do people who are asymptomatic have in common? And that does not mean that we can mimic the asymptomatic people, but to be able to, because a lot, like most of what health is nature and nurture, right? You can't really do anything about the nature, but it gives us really important information. Whereas the environment, what you do has more choice in it, right? Whether you're taking zinc or whether you're taking vitamin C. But you taking vitamin C might heal you and it wouldn't heal me, right? Or vice versa. Right. And so having the genome there to say, hey, these people have this in common, and just more information. And we have a lot of people have access to that information, but it's not able to be put into the system. Same with Fitbits and all this smart data that if we can figure out, like, I should own my Fitbit data and I should be able to decide what to do with it. And then when a system's designed that I trust, that I can upload that into, I can upload my genetic information because it's mine. And that being said, there's a whole ethic of like, mine's also my siblings and my parents, right? And my kids and all of this stuff. So there's secrets and truths that can come out in that information. And information we might find out as global society that we didn't know as well. But yeah, genomes and our environmental data.
Who does own your Fitbit data then? Do Fitbit own the data? That is really?
Pretty sure at the point right now legally.
Wow.
And then that, like, if we pass laws that are like you can upload yours, and then it doesn't matter if you have a Fitbit or whatever the alternatives are, that as long as you have A1, here's where it's uploaded, and you can see. I mean, I've wanted to have this app because I'm chronically ill for a very long time, because I can't solve my health issues by myself. I can only solve them with cohorts, right? I can only, even if I try something and it makes me feel better, how long is that going to last for? And is it placebo? Is it nocebo? Is it to be able to say, hey, is this my genetics? Is it going to be changed by diet? You need to have more information, and it involves a population.
Julie, I'm sorry. Are you part of Patients Like Me? That's a peer network where people who have a common health challenge essentially compare notes online, and I believe it's quite a big network now. Do you see any prospect that could be a place where people willing to have DNA sharing could do that, and in ways that would approach the sort of level of significance and sample size?
Yeah, that would be interesting. I've never heard of Patients Like Me, and I have to say that's one of the things that I've wanted to create in the world. And so many of the things are already out there, but like I've been seeking them and we don't know. And although that's not this issue, both the Dragon's Den thing of like solutions, how do we get them out into the world, and a system, a platform that solves marketing for us, where instead of the, humidifiers telling us which one's the best, we say which one's the best, right? Which one lasts the longest, which one has the most sucking in of water from the air, which one, like all of that information, including especially tech, especially like there are these apps that meet my needs and I don't even know they exist. And then they go under before you find out they exist, even though they were absolutely amazing and needed. And since, like, why reinvent the wheel? Like, just get people to know about what's out there. And Android Play Store and whatever the Apple one is called is not, they're not interested in doing that. They're 1 to 5 stars. They don't care. Download one, download the next. We only care you have our product. Whereas we care about the features each one of them have, the cost it has, the longevity of it, and the social impact of it, right? The social impact. I don't even know who owns Patients Like Me. Quite frankly, Google could own it. And if it's still giving me benefit, I would use it. But I would rather we own it, right? I would rather be able to trust it. And that's something we can build together. Is who owns that? How do I know where this data is going? How, so that I can feel more confident sharing whatever I'm sharing with everybody.
There's a Boston company which has gotten FDA clearance for a wearable bracelet that tracks 12 data streams, 12 vital signs, And they've recently entered into a pilot in Hong Kong to see if they can pull from this in clinical trials correlations that will lend insight. And I'm sure it's a super pricey product, but if systems are going to break in public health, and there is this rise of this crowdsourcing of innovations and maker spaces, and people who have deep experience in healthcare, able to create prototypes that essentially allow for affordable tracking into a peer-to-peer system that's high trust. I imagine that would be welcomed if in the event that this virus adapts and mutates too quickly to come up with vaccines that
that would be. I feel like that's actually what's the word, adjacent possible, is all of people with this information already, finding 10,000 of them who are like willing to put their data into the system. And what is that criteria? Because it's already there. And in any kind of health crisis, whether it's, the increasing cancer or anything like that, having people, instead of signing a signature or giving $5 to go towards the for-profit, we're pretending we're trying to find a cure to cancer industry, having it be like, no, I'm giving my data. Like, here, I don't know if I'm going to get cancer or not, but if I do, what a plethora of data I'm going to be. Like in this health crisis, here's my information. I don't know if I have coronavirus, but you'll be able to see my temperature be going up if I do get it. And so having people opt into a system and have that be part of like the call to action when something like this happens is like, that's something you can do. And then when stuff goes horrifically wrong with our data, how do we fix that the next time and the next time, and looking for solutions.
And for people in my age group, at least, thinking of what one can do if the cards, there's no to participate in projects like this that generated value for one's progeny and their kids. So I think the notion of having in a peer-to-peer system a way for the early movers to know that the insights from this are going to be made available on a first-served basis to the families, extended families of those who participate. I think that would be quite a welcome prospect. On a personal note, I was diagnosed 10 years ago with prostate cancer, and the preferred treatment, after I researched pretty carefully, was something the FDA had not approved. And the reason it hadn't approved was the medical device, an ultrasound device. The manufacturer kept improving it. And so since each device would have to go through an enormously expensive testing, multi-year testing, and then be obsolete, they focused on Europe, which had a far more open regulatory system, and parts of the Caribbean. And I wound up flying twice over the past 10 years to the Cayman Islands and to Bahamas for a treatment that's absolutely commonplace and proven in all over the world, in Japan, in China, in Europe. And the FDA, because of the rapid pace of change, just couldn't, until finally it relented and said, we've got to be more flexible, and they did. But now we're at a torrent. We have exponential change in sensor systems and medical devices, and if we're roadblocking these pooled, crowdsourced innovations, prototype devices, and essentially saying, nope, you've got to jump through the hurdles that'll cost millions and probably lead to an obsolete, out-of-date device by the time it does see daylight.
Bureaucracy is killing us, for sure, on every level.
I would love more and more to see experimental jurisdictions, areas with different regulatory regimes that all of us can learn from, with the kind of data that is not going to be distorted, by vested interests and bureaucracies and corporations. I think that could be an enormous growth possibility.
Absolutely. And I think one of the biggest, I've sat with this one because of my health issues for a lot of like, how could we use technology to help us improve our health? And this idea that people would need to be forced to do it, right? We have to put our information in, is definitely not the road I want to go down. And so if you have a voluntary system, I like the idea, because first of all, your progeny are going to be the #1 people to benefit because they share your genetics if they share your genetics, right? I don't think we call progeny anything different. But if you choose not to share your data, the person you're hurting the most, the demographics you were hurting the most, are any demographics you're part of. So if all, white men with diabetes, somehow there was something correlated where they didn't trust and they didn't share their data, it would be white men without diabetes we don't have enough information in the system on, right? So more information is going to benefit every group you're part of. And there's a lot of power in our data. And that's why I want a cooperatively owned technology company, so we can trust in sharing our data in a way that can benefit me and all of humanity, where everyone feels safe. We're definitely past the hour. So does anyone else have any closing remarks? Nope. All right.
Okay.
Say bye to you too. Thanks for joining. This was the hardest one we've tackled so far in solution raising. I don't know if we came up with a definitive answers. We usually don't, but lots of sparks of ideas of things that have huge potential to help create solutions on this planet during this crisis. So thank you, Mark and Eric, and goodbye, YouTube.
Thank you. Good to continue.